I want to share some huge news with you. It might sound strange and definitely misunderstood by many, but yes, this news item is huge. Understand, what I'm about to tell you is an extremely significant development in Israel's war effort, even though it does not sound so connected to the war. Prime Minister Netanyahu just decided to appoint Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer as the head of the ceasefire hostage negotiations for the government of Israel, to replace the heads of Israeli intelligence services, the heads of Israeli intelligence agencies. This is far more than just a shift in personnel. This is a seismic move against, wait for it, the Israeli deep state, which for years has been taking its orders from the U.S. foreign policy establishment, the U.S. deep state. Now with President Biden and his administration out, and President Trump in, actively and swiftly moving to dismantle the deep state in Washington, D.C., Prime Minister Netanyahu is finally in a position here in Israel to start the same process in Israel. Something he was never able to do in all of his years as Prime Minister of Israel when the deep state in Washington, D.C. had its control over Israel. As an aside, Elon Musk recently explained beautifully and concisely the concept of the deep state. Listen here. He explains that it refers to an unelected government public sector careerists who direct the policy of a country despite the mandate from elected officials who represent the will of the people. Hence, you have careerists who overrule the will of the people. For too long, the deep state in Israel has been undermining the will of the elected government, torpedoing senior and junior appointments, and using crisis after crisis to manipulate events in a way that serves foreign interests rather than Israel's security and sovereignty as voted by the will of the people election after election. This was most evident in the judicial reform protests before the October 7th, 2023 massacre, where elites, backed by the Biden administration and foreign funding, sought to overturn the will of the Israeli electorate that voted for judicial reform that is so needed in Israel. It was also evident in the failures that led to the October 7th tragedy, as the whole deep state establishment in Israel actively supported the IDF insurrection that motivated our Islamo-Nazi enemies to launch their planned attack against a very broken IDF because so many soldiers said proudly that they wouldn't serve anymore, even in an emergency. In addition to all of that, the Israeli deep state placed constant roadblocks in Netanyahu's efforts to conduct the war we are in right now in a way that ensures Israel can be victorious over our surrounding Islamo-Nazi enemies to protect Israelis in the future, failing to implement a proper strategy according to the established war goals of the government, and constantly pushing back against the war directives of the Netanyahu government, as well as constantly leaking confidential information from meetings to the press that harm the war efforts and the hostage negotiations. Any analysis that you might have read in the media over the past few years about the judicial reform protest that was in Israel, or the judicial reform itself, the war, or the hostage situation that ignored the deep state's influence in all of those events from A to Z is simply not trustworthy. Those media reports miss the real backstory driving those events here in Israel. Now enter Ron Dermer, a man who knows the American political system better than anyone else in Israeli politics, second only to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Unlike Lapid, who sought to ingratiate himself with Washington's deep state progressive elites, Ron Dermer has a deep understanding of how the U.S. foreign policy machine actually works. Dermer's appointment means that Netanyahu is finally moving towards dismantling the deep state's grip on Israel's decision-making process, because they were the ones that were running the hostage process, negotiations, and leaking it to the press, harming Netanyahu and the government and freeing our hostages. Dermer and Netanyahu's immediate goals are clear. Dismantle Hamas and bring home as many hostages as possible without being shackled by the sabotage of Israel's own bureaucratic deep state elite. By contrast, Israel's Secret Service head Ronen Bar, who has been actively involved in leading the negotiations until now, is heavily connected to Israel's deep state. As hard as it is to internalize, many of Bar's actions in this war and in the negotiations to free our hostages were not about helping achieve victory as well as saving our hostages, but it was about pushing for Israel to surrender totally to free the hostages, preventing Israel from being able to achieve a decisive victory and protect all Israelis in moving forward. It is important to understand that with all the holy work that Ronen Bar has done over the years in the security services, Ronen Bar, more than anyone else, is personally responsible for the failures of the IDF and the security services in protecting Israelis on that tragic, fateful day of October 7th, 2023. Reports in Israeli media have uncovered information that Ronen Bar knew about the invasion already at around 3 a.m. in the morning, and he sent special teams of Secret Service men to save senior officials who were in communities on the Gaza border. Not only did Bar not update the Prime Minister about the situation until 6:30 in the morning, that's 3.5 hours later, after the invasion already began, but he didn't even warn the IDF to wake up the soldiers and to take their positions along the Gaza border fence to be prepared to prevent the invasion. And ready for this? The official explanation given to the press by the Secret Service why they didn't do anything or warn anybody, quote, they only thought it was going to be an attack on 2 communities with a few hostages taken, end quote. This has been reported by a number of times by Israeli reporter Ayala Hasson on Israeli Channel 11 News. Can you imagine that despicable explanation? Oh, they only thought it was going to be 3 a.m. They only thought 2 communities would be infiltrated with only some hostages, so no need to warn the army to prevent the invasion or to warn the Prime Minister by waking him up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Insane! And this is only one of the horrific failings of the intelligence services under Ronen Bar's leadership that led to the devastating failure of October 7th. He should have been fired on October 8th, but the deep state would have gone crazy if Netanyahu had fired him. So Bar has remained in his position until today, and only now, after Trump's win and taking of office, does Netanyahu feel that he can replace him in the negotiation process, even though he's still in his position leading the Secret Service. On the political front, Bar understood that surrendering to Hamas's demands would politically destroy Netanyahu, as his main allegiance was to a judicial elite and foreign-backed protest movement seeking to topple Netanyahu's government in the middle of the war and before the war. Now let's focus on the hostage protest movement that I've spoken about a number of times. If the hostage issue truly was the sole issue of freeing the hostages that mattered to the leaders of the hostage protest movement, don't you think they would have been demonstrating to stop the aid to Hamas, protesting against the United Nations, UNRWA, the International Red Cross, Egypt, Qatar, and Europe, all enablers of the Hamas atrocities who have leverage to force Hamas to free our hostages? But no, since day one, the leaders of the hostage protest movement instead chose to direct their protests solely at Netanyahu and the Israeli government. They even promoted horrific claims like Netanyahu wants the hostages to die in Gaza for political reasons. And this was said time after time by the Israeli media, establishment media. That tells you everything you need to know about the real agenda of the hostage protest movement. As long as Israel fails to achieve a complete victory in this war, Netanyahu remains the convenient scapegoat. However, a full military success, despite the challenges and the pushback from the heads of the military and secret service throughout the war, would expose the failures of the military leadership, of the security services, and the deep state operatives, like the legal establishment, who have mismanaged Israel's defense for years and mismanaged this war. As sad as it sounds, that is why figures like Secret Service head Ronen Bar and IDF Chief of Staff Halevi have led the war in such a way that Israel essentially would need to surrender to Hamas, and allowing Hamas to remain in power in Gaza after the war. That serves the interests of the deep state to weaken Netanyahu and topple his government, although it doesn't serve the interests of protecting Israel. Dermer, on the other hand, understands the strategic game both on the geopolitical front and on the internal deep state front. Slowly but surely, now with the U.S. deep state being dismantled by President Trump, Netanyahu has taken his first step, by putting Dermer in this role, in dismantling the Israeli deep state to replace it with leadership that serves the people of Israel, not foreign interests out to keep Israel under the control of that same deep state. Now, many on the right, the conservative right in Israel, wish the process was happening faster, but it was never possible until President Trump took office. And no other realistic prime minister option at the moment in Israel has the resilience, like Netanyahu, to withstand the immense pressure of the leftist cult and the entrenched bureaucratic elites of the deep state in our country. Armchair critics may complain about Netanyahu, but navigating Israel's survival on an international forum in a region full of Islamo-Nazi enemies through these treacherous internal waters as well is no small task. It's a Herculean task. This is not just about a war strategy. It's about Israel's future as a sovereign, strong Jewish state free from foreign manipulation and internal sabotage by a deep state. Netanyahu is steering the Jewish state of Israel towards safe shores, ensuring that Israel's leadership is accountable to the Israeli people, not to the unelected, bureaucratic, deep state apparatus that has worked against Israeli interests and the interests of Israeli people for far too long. The noise from the deep state establishment and their media allies, the establishment media, is just that, noise. It will fade into irrelevance as Netanyahu continues to dismantle their stranglehold on the country. And it's going to take time. It's not easy and it's going to be slow. The real story is unfolding behind the scenes, and it is a story of reclaiming Israel's sovereignty from those within who have sought to erode it. The deep state is finally being exposed and weakened day in and day out, with more Israelis waking up. That's why Dermer's appointment is not just an administrative decision. It's a pivotal moment in Israel's battle for its own independence from the forces that have long sought to control it from the shadows. The next critical move Netanyahu must make is to replace the Attorney General of the government, who has repeatedly acted as an obstacle to the Israeli government rather than supporting it and advising it as the role. Instead of facilitating the government's policies and appointments, she has systematically blocked key decisions and legislative efforts and appointments. Instead of investigating confidential leaks of senior politicians like Gilad Kariv and security officials who undermine the government, she concocts investigations against those helping the war effort. Instead of investigating our barbaric terrorists, she is investigating holy IDF soldiers on concocted claims. Instead of helping the government pursue a policy to help our holy IDF soldiers protect us in the warfield, she comes up with legal restrictions that stop our holy IDF soldiers from protecting us and themselves. And that is only a short list of the problems of the sabotage from our own justice system, including the Attorney General to the government. We're not just talking about bureaucratic interference. This is all direct subversion of the elected government's mandate. Netanyahu must act now to ensure that legal counsel and the whole justice system in Israel is finally reformed to mete out justice, how novel, and not to continue with its activist deep state agenda against the people of Israel, the will of the people, for us to be a strong, proud Jewish state of Israel. That's it for today's Pulse of Israel. I hope this gives you some inspiration, as well as a little more understanding of Israeli politics, the deep state within Israel. There are so many layers of an onion to unpeel here, but I gave you some of them to better understand, but obviously to appreciate the unbelievable news of Ron Dermer's appointment to lead the negotiation process right now. If you are not yet a subscriber to our belief-based, inspiring, politically incorrect videos about Israel, the Jewish people, and the freedom-loving world of the Pulse of Israel, what are you waiting for? Go to pulseofisrael.com and click to subscribe. And yes, we are a donor-based operation. Our videos are free, but we rely on your donations, large or small, in order to do our work and get our videos seen. As we are heavily censored and shadow banned across all social media platforms, it's thanks to your donations that we're able to have our videos seen. And so many people need to be further informed and understand the depth of what we are experiencing here in Israel. And these are redemptive times. And I want people to understand it and not have to rely on the misinformation and disinformation from the establishment media. I want them to know more information. I want them to be inspired by having the deeper information, and then to understand the miracles we're living and the redemptive times we're living in. So if you're able to give a donation, large or small, every once in a while, just click on the donate button on pulseofisrael.com. Thank you. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.